Hi there! Today, we're going to study again, alright? Or know more about the introduction and overview of Psalms. But this time, we're going to use the Devotional Study Bible, New International Version. Okay? So, introduction to Psalms. Cries from the Heart. Songs for sorrow as well as joy. You are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. According to Psalms 32, verse 7. Here, at the very center of the Bible, are songs, rising up like a tune from its heart. They capture innermost thoughts and prayers of the Old Testament people, and they still speak directly to our needs. For every emotion and mood, you can find a psalm to match. The Psalms wrestle with the deepest sorrow and ask God the hardest questions about suffering and injustice. Their voice is refreshingly spontaneous. They do not tip flowery compliments toward God. They cry out to Him or shout for joy before Him. After you read these poems, you can think of the Old Testament as dry and rule-bound, nor is the Old Testament God distant and impersonal. In almost every psalm, you find the presence of God, not as a philosophical principle, but as an active, strong, and loving ruler, a God who makes a difference in life. How did the Psalms come together? While almost half of the Psalms are credited to David, at least one was written 500 years after his birth. A number of poets and writers contributed, and about a third of the Psalms are completely anonymous. How did the Psalms come together? They seem to have been compiled as a hymn book for use in temple worship. Some psalms were written from an individual's experiences, but were adapted for congregational use. Directions for musicians were added, along with a few verses to widen the psalm's meaning to everybody. The Psalms show tremendous variation, reflecting the many personalities who contributed their poems and prayers over several centuries. Yet readers have found an inner consistency in the whole book, so they can move from one psalm to the next without being particularly aware that one poem is centuries older than another. Some have called the Psalms a Bible within the Bible, different books telling a single story. Others have compared the Book of Psalms to a beautiful cathedral built over centuries. Each wing and each window show the individual genius of its designers, yet all the parts are somehow harmonious. This harmony comes not merely from a common sense of style, but from unity of purpose. The whole cathedral is made for the worship of one and the same God. Just so, the Psalms reflect, in 100 moods and experiences, the never-changing reality of a strong and loving God who cares for His people. Now let's talk about the presence of real enemies. God is not the only reality in the Psalms. Equally persistent are enemies who sneer and hurt and plot violence. They too appear in nearly every psalm. For the psalmist, faith in God was a struggle against powerful forces that often seemed more real than God. The psalm writers frequently asked, "Where are you, God? Why don't you help me?" Despite their love of God, they often felt abandoned, misused, betrayed. They found no guarantee of safety in their closeness to God. The joy and praise that saturate these prayers came not from an absence of problems, but from a deep conviction that the great God would overcome them. Jesus, dying on the cross, twice expressed himself in words of Psalms in chapter 22 verse 1 and chapter 31 verse 5. And his disciples, in trying to explain his life, quoted from Psalms more than any other book. They appear to have meditated on the Psalms often as they considered the meaning of Jesus' life. In the Psalms, they could see that even the best men, even David, the great king, suffer agony and feel abandoned. Living by faith is not easy. It was not for David. It was not for Jesus either. These powerful poems of praise and worship, some of the most beautiful ever written, offer no magical formulas to make troubles go away. Yet, while real-life questions, struggles, and discouragements have a strong voice in these poems, more powerful still is the voice of joy and security in the strength and fortress of Israel, the Lord Himself. You may ask, how to read Psalms? The best way to read the Psalms is also the most common way. To make these ancient prayers your own and speak them directly to God. So many of the poems catch deep human feelings that you can't help being moved by them. But not all the Psalms seem attractive. Some sound harsh, self-congratulatory, or boring. You will not find it easy to pray this until you understand them. And there are so many Psalms. This is the longest book in the Bible. To compensate, many people read only selected Psalms, skimming over the others. But then, they miss the deeper messages found there, including the messages that the New Testament writers saw when they quoted Psalms more than any other Old Testament book. The richest lessons from Psalms may come from particularly difficult poems you must read again and again until you begin to see what the author had in mind. The original Hebrew of these poems probably used no rhyme or strict rhythm as traditional English poems do. Instead, the psalmist wrote with parallelism, following one thought by rhyming, quote-unquote, thought, or by its opposite. For more of this, we can see making sense out of parallelism in page 549 if we use the same devotional study Bible, the NIV. But anyway, fortunately, this kind of poetry can be translated into almost any language without loss. Readers may be confused by the Psalm's frequent change of voice. In a single poem, the psalmist may talk to God, then talk about Him, and then return to talking to Him, all in rapid succession. This would be strange English prose, but was common in Hebrew poetry. Because so many of the psalm titles refer to David, you may find it helpful to refer to his life story. It is found in 1 Samuel chapter 16 to 31, the whole book of 2 Samuel, and the first 2 chapters of 1 Kings. However, most of the Psalms can make perfect sense without reference to any outside information. They merely ask and reward time and close attention. So, you just have to read and reread them, and they grow richer with careful study. For the plans in reading Psalms, we may follow as being suggested with the Bible League Devotional Study Bible NIV. Alright, in Plan 1, the overview of Psalms in 7 days. Okay, so day 1, read the introduction to Psalms, and then Psalm 19, which talks about perfect harmony. In day 2, read Psalm 23, the Shepherd's Song. Day 3, read Psalm 27, Confidence in Trouble. Day 4, read Psalm 51, the Great Confession. Day 5, read Psalm 84, the Delight of Worshiping God. Day 6, read Psalm 103, God's Benefits. And day 7, read Psalm 139, which talks about God's care. So in 7 days, we're done the overview, alright, of Psalms in a manner that we study it thoroughly. Don't you worry, I'm going to give you the plans for reading Psalms, both for Plan 1 and Plan 2. But just to summarize, in Plan 2, all of the Psalms will be done in 2-month period. Alright? So, this devotional study Bible divides Plan 2 into Part 1 and Part 2. So, Part 1 will start with, the Part 1 of Plan 2 will start with chapters 1 and 2. You go back, because if you notice, with the overview, we don't start with chapters 1 and 2 or chapter 1 after the introduction. So we're being advised to proceed to Psalm 19 after the introduction. Meaning, after you read the introduction on your own, you proceed to Psalm 19, which is about perfect harmony. Then you follow the plan for days 2 to 7 as mentioned a few minutes ago. Only then can you proceed to Plan 2, alright, for reading the Psalms. Plan 2 is being divided into Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 is from chapters 1 and 2 up to chapter 75, and then Part 2 is from chapter 76 to the last 2 chapters, chapters 149 and 150. You can make some modifications, of course, depending on God's leading on you, to you, or your pacing, but in my own opinion, this is already a very good guide. I guess they've studied it very well for our convenience and, for us to be able to understand, comprehend, and appreciate the book of Psalms more. This is just a guide, but that's just an ordinary guide. A guide was studied by those experts, the anointed, experienced ministers behind this. Okay? As mentioned, I will provide you with a copy of the Plan 1 and Plan 2 with Part 1 and Part 2 under Plan 2. So again, it says that all of the Psalms will be studied in 2 months periods. It's all up to you. If you're gonna stick to the schedule or do some modifications or divisions. So just go as God leads, and then that's it. Making sense of parallelism was mentioned a while ago as we talked about how to study or read the book of Psalms. So what is parallelism? It is a technical term for the form of Hebrew poetry that repeats a thought in slightly different ways. Synonymous parallelism is found in Proverbs 15:30. It goes where it says, "A cheerful look brings joy to the heart, and good news gives health to the bones." On the other hand, anti or antithetical parallelism, in which a thought is followed by its opposite, as found in chapter 14, verse 30. "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." In studying parallelism, the trick is to compare each part with its pair in the other half of the proverb. For instance, in chapter 14, verse 30, a heart at peace pairs with its opposite, envy, and the rots the bones is the opposite of gives life to the body. Sometimes these comparisons reveal subtle shades of meaning. Oh, by the way, have you noticed that after some time of finishing with quite a number of psalms for meditation or for reading and meditation with some divisions and modification along the way, of course, as God has led us. But we went back to Psalm 1 at some points. Did you notice that? The very reason for that, even before I bumped into this devotional study Bible of mine, is that I wanted to emphasize on the 5 books that make up the whole book of Psalms. Alright? Psalms was probably made into one big book from 5 separate collections. We were already halfway, I'm not sure though, when I noticed, how the Bible emphasizes on that. So I have decided to go back a bit and stress on those 5 books, or what are the specific chapters under the certain book number. So at this point, we're done with book 1, chapters 1 to 41, and then book 2, alright, chapters 42 to 72. So, let's talk about the 5 books. Psalms was probably made into one big book from 5 separate collections. These are set off in our Bible as book 1, book 2, and so on, each book ending with a concluding line of praise. The contents sometimes overlap. Psalm 14 in book 1 turns up again as Psalm 53 in book 2. Part of Psalm 40 in book 1 becomes Psalm 70 in book 2, and parts of Psalm 57 and 60 make up Psalm 108 in book 4. Other less noticeable differences stand out between the different books. But perhaps the most eloquent proof that all these songs were not originally collected together is found at the end of Psalm 72. This concludes that prayers of David, son of Jesse. Since 80 more Psalms of David appear in Psalms, it seems very likely that Psalm 72 verse 20 originally concluded a songbook. Later, this collection was incorporated into the book of Psalms.